Good evening, everyone. It's about 7 o'clock. Now I think we can get going. Welcome everyone to this meeting of the Housing, Community Safety and Community Engagement Scrutiny Commission. You might notice that the Councillor Sam Foster looks a little bit different because I'm Councillor Emily Tester and I'm the Vice Chair of the Commission, and I'm standing in this evening for Councillor Foster, who sent his apologies. This is my first time chairing one of these meetings, so I just want to make any apologies in advance if it's not as smooth as it would be with Councillor Foster. There's no planned fire alarm test this evening, and if you do hear the fire alarm, please leave by the nearest fire exit and make your way to the agreed assembly point, which is St John's Churchyard, just off of Druid Street. Council security staff will be available to direct you. The public toilets are located off of the main reception area if you need them, and please switch your phone to silent whilst in the meeting room. Members of the public are welcome to film, audio record, photograph or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting, but I'd ask you to be considerate of other people in the room and take care to not disturb the proceedings. If you are filming the meeting, please do not film the audience. A copy of the Council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on the Southwark website. And the Council's free internet is called Southwark Free Wi-Fi, and it doesn't need a password. This meeting is being live streamed via the Microsoft Teams platform to YouTube, and can I remind members of the Commission to raise your hand if you want to speak, and please wait until I've given you permission to speak before contributing, and also to speak quite closely into the microphone as well, because it's not picking it up very well, I've been told. Finally, can I also ask members to refrain from digressing onto other issues and keep their comments or questions concise and specific to the agenda item being discussed? So the first item on the agenda is apologies. We've had apologies from Councillor Foster, Chris Claridge and Ina Negotia. Do we have any others? I don't know if Councillor Harper is running a little bit late. I don't know if anyone knows any more about that, but I have to take that down as being late for now. And can I move on to the confirmation of voting members? Would all voting members present in the room please show your hand or respond verbally when your name is called out? So we've got Councillor Barry Hargrove. Thank you. Councillor Esme Hicks. Councillor Sully Lamb. And Councillor Jane Salmon. And I'm Councillor Emily Tester, the Vice Chair, as well. And item 2, notification of any items of business which the Chair deems urgent. There's no urgent items of business to be added, so I think we can move on from that one. And moving on to the next item, which is disclosure of interest and dispensations. Does any member wish to declare any interest on dispensations in respect of any item of business to be considered at this meeting? Great, thanks very much, everyone. So the next item, agenda item 4, is the minutes. Firstly, I would like to refer to the minutes from the 18th of September 2024, which at our 25th of November meeting, we agreed to approve subject to checking for a potential error brought to our attention by Chris Claridge. Thank you, Chris, who's not here. There was actually an error in September 2022. There were 57 TRAs, not 7 as initially written on page 3 of the draft minutes. These minutes have now been corrected. And regarding the minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of November, can we agree to approve these as being correct? Great, thank you all. So moving on to item number 5, which is the Cabinet responses to the Commission's review of housing allocations, homelessness and heating and hot water outages, fire, safety and policing in Southwark. It's a very long title. This item is on the agenda for us to note. The Cabinet responses to the Commission's recommendations in our report review of housing allocations, homelessness and heating and hot water outages, fire, safety and policing in Southwark were made via 2 Cabinet reports, which corresponded to departmental member responsibilities. These reports are included in the agenda pack between pages 8 and 19. There was a response to recommendation 12 that was omitted from these and was instead made by officers across a number of departments with agreement from Councillors Dennis, King and Ennin. Page 30 has got that recommendation on there. Does any member have any kind of comment on these responses? There isn't any kind of process for us allowed further responses to be sent to the Cabinet, but obviously any responses that you do have will be kind of noted on that. I think I saw Councillor Hicks move her hand.
Thank you. It was just in relation to recommendation 7 and then not agreeing that at the Cabinet. So this was the recommendation we put forward about doing some work to understand the gap between self-reported experience of residents in terms of their heating and hot water outages and the centrally held data. I think we'd found through our scrutiny work that there was quite a discrepancy in what residents were saying versus what the central data was saying, and I think that's still a problem. I appreciate the Cabinet's response in terms of, that would be resource intensive, I think they said, in terms of doing the work. I think the way they've come back in the response is that this would be a time-consuming consultation exercise. I'm not quite sure whether that's what we were proposing. It was more of a, can we do a pinpoint bit of analysis on a particular estate or another to try and understand the discrepancy, the delta between the two sets of figures. So while I think the proposal to set up the Heat Networks Governance Board to increase scrutiny is a good one. If that board is looking at data that isn't quite matching up to residents' experience, I'm not sure that's as good a scrutiny, additional scrutiny function as it could be. So that was just some comments I had. I appreciate there's not a mechanism for that to go back formally, but thank you.
I suppose in terms of kind of if we wanted to give that sort of feedback that there might have been a slight misunderstanding of what our recommendation actually was, is there a kind of formal mechanism that we could use to do that, or is there? I'm mostly asking you because I'm not really sure.
There is no mechanism for a reply to Cabinet's response. There is this forum here for which people can speak and it can be noted, and there is an opportunity at the end in the final item to consider the work plan for next year and how that might feed into ideas there.
Just to follow up from the points you just made. Okay, if there's a mechanism through the Cabinet, is it possible to then make a specific recommendation then, if we feel strongly that it's so strong enough that it needs to be revisited because they didn't capture it, when they did the report?
I suppose what we've heard is that there isn't a formal way that the Commission can make a sort of changed recommendation, but what we as councillors could do is perhaps ask a question at the next full council meeting to the relevant Cabinet member and perhaps sort of get some clarity in that way. Whilst it's not like a formal kind of recommendation of the Commission, it still might be a way to sort of have a response and possibly get a little bit of kind of clarity on that. And that's something that I could kind of take away as an individual councillor and look at. That might be the best way to move forward if there's no sort of formal no sort of formal mechanism that we as a Commission could use. Right, well, I'll repeat that just for the benefit of the recording in that case. So I suppose what we can do is bring the relevant officers and Cabinet members' attention towards this meeting and what was kind of been discussed there, and we can ask them to kind of have a look at it from that sort of more informal kind of way. Thank you for the clarity on that. That's really helpful. Were there any other kind of comments on any of the recommendations, Councillor Salmon?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I wasn't at the meeting, so I apologise. But it said key activities and target completion dates, including complete resident consultation at Rowell Road. Did that happen? Do we know if any of this, because some of them was completed last month and in December and January. Do we know if any, this is on page 9 or 2 at the bottom. I'm just curious, we might not be able to answer that question now, but I just wondered if all of those things had happened, bar the one that says it's 2026.
Only
because it says completion date is December. Just wondering if that they did come to speak to us, didn't they? Maybe for the next meeting we can find out if all these happen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so no, sorry. Yeah, thank you. I think unfortunately we don't have any of the officers or kind of cabinet members here to answer that question. But that's certainly something I think we could find out the answer to. I think that would be good to know. Great. And anyone else have any kind of further observations? I think the only kind of observation I would make is around recommendation 10, which I think is something specifically that I had asked for, and I sort of I appreciate the response of the kind of the cabinet member in terms of agreeing with the principle of it, but it not being kind of practical. I do kind of hope that there's, you know, perhaps if the council is doing some, I know that there are some kind of liaison boards and things that the council has with private renters, and if it's something that they could do to kind of promote that to private renters, that actually if they've had a heating outage, they should be asking their landlord for money back if the hot water and heating has been included in their rent. I do think that that's something that the council could be doing in terms of sort of promoting that. But I think I you know, I understand that it would be a very difficult task to adopt that recommendation. So I think that response is fair and understandable. Yeah, Councillor Hicks.
Thank you. So it's just an additional one to note in relation to my previous point. So recommendation 9, the first response talks about an underlying task around improving reporting structure and methodology, digitising it, making the data cleaner. My only remark on that would be, again, back to my previous point, if the data is not quite showing reality, can we just be confident on that? The data might be clean, but if it's not reflecting reality entirely, then it's not as strong as it could be. The only additional point.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hicks. I think that's a really useful point to make, and I think it does really kind of talk back to what we sort of spoke about at those meetings about the data that we've been showing not being representative of the kind of the residents and the ward councillors that spoke to us and their sort of experience. So I think that's a really important point to be noting. So unless there's anything further on this, are we okay to agree to note the response to our recommendations? Yeah. Great. Fantastic. Thank you. So moving on to item number 6 now. This item is to discuss the next steps with the interim report on tenant structures, which gathered the recommendations made by commission members at our November meeting. This is in response to us hearing from residents and tenants organisations during that and also in the previous meeting. Officers aren't present today, but a briefing note to members has been provided by the Director of Landlord Services, and this was published in Supplemental Agenda number 1, page 6. The interim report itself is in the same supplemental agenda, which is pages 1 to 5. So ideally, we want to sort of discuss today, and in light of the briefing note, do we want to make any kind of recommendations to Cabinet? And if so, what sort of changes would we kind of like to see? I don't know if anyone has any kind of initial thoughts on this. Councillor Salmon.
Sorry, Chair. Yes. Another great piece. I'm just wondering, after scrutinising the tenant structures, I'm just wondering if we need to be scrutinising the TMOs as well. I know there's not a huge, I think there's 17 of them. I'm saying figures off the top of my head. But I just think the way they work, do with a little deep dive, maybe it could go onto our work programme for, you know, the next round of missions. But I just think that there's a few things come out of events. And I do think that maybe TMOs should be scrutinised a bit about their structures, their financing, how they work. I think would be very good. So, I don't know if it can be put on here, but if not, then I would suggest it goes to the next round of our work programme. already got plenty of things on it, but if I could suggest that, thank you.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. I think certainly there is it does seem like there is a slight kind of omission in this item, which does sort of cover that doesn't really cover TMOs in the sense that obviously there's also a kind of resident involvement piece within TMOs as well, and I know that the regulator's sort of recent kind of judgment on Southwark Council also had that there were kind of weaknesses in supporting tenants with their kind of housing management functions through TMO. So I wonder if I don't quite know what the wording of it would be, but I wonder if within this there is a recommendation that could be around TMOs and kind of that community engagement piece, because it's sort of TMOs are mentioned very briefly in paragraph 3, but they're not actually really specifically mentioned in any of the recommendations. So I do wonder if that could be an addition to that. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about that. Councillor Lamb?
Yeah, Chair. I think if it's going to increase or improve accountability, for instance, I think it's worth considering. Because if you are delivering services on behalf of the residents and you are using, because part of the money, I believe the budgets come from public purse. So therefore, there's a need for accountability. And through that accountability, it provides an opportunity for them, through critical examination of how they operate. And of course, there'll be recommendations or suggestions on how to improve things. So I think, coming back to the question, I think it makes sense for at least an element of that to be included, if it's not at the moment, as I can see.
Okay, I think that's really helpful. I think there are possibly two kind of separate points that you brought up. So one about a kind of a TMO focused resident involvement strategy part, but then also perhaps something for item 7 where there's a sort of looking at TMOs, and that's something perhaps that we come to later, because I think the sort of the financial structures would fall slightly outside of this kind of item about resident involvement, but perhaps there is sort of something that could be a recommendation. I don't quite know what that would look like, but I'm sure that's something that we could work up offline as well. Does anyone have any other kind of thoughts about the recommendations that have been sort of put forward, or any comments or any ideas of other recommendations that they think should be put in? Yeah, Councillor Hicks.
I think the recommendation is good. I think it's reflective of the conversation we had. I think the point around TMOs, so I guess it would have been a previous interest, but not anymore. I'm former chair of a TMO. I think there's a lot more that the council could be doing to support TMOs. So I would be supportive of adding that to a future work agenda item. I'm just thoughtful about what a recommendation around TMOs would be for this report. What is it that we're looking to ask Cabinet to do? Is it to beef up the part of the resident involvement strategy around TMOs in terms of the scope of that strategy, or what is it we're asking them to do? I guess I'm not quite there with it, but maybe you can help me.
Sorry, Chair. If we maybe just put it on the work programme first and find out what we do and don't know, if you see what I mean, so we know. So maybe it's a next year sort of item. But I think we're wrong to. There's 16 of them I've discovered, and they look after a sizable amount of people. And I suspect, as you've probably found, Councillor, you don't know you're in a TMO until you're in a TMO. You're just moved into a place and you don't know that you're not council and you're somewhere in the interim. So to hear some experiences for people would be also very important. So like you say about involvement and understanding how they work, I think that's
work plan.
Councillor Lamb.
And if I could just add, I'm just looking at page 2, paragraph 7, with recommendation 1. When you then look at the rationale, even though it doesn't specifically mention the TMO and so on, it only talks about transparency, accountability, and so on. So therefore, it makes sense to actually have an element of that in how we, the TMO is managed and how it responds, and to the needs of the people who supposed to provide those services for. So that's a strong argument for having it.
That's really helpful. I think that's a very fair point, actually, about maybe it's worth a sort of something for next year that we can kind of invite some TMOs in to speak and sort of talk about their kind of experiences in terms of their kind of navigating the council, but then also about how they are engaging with their residents, how they are being transparent and looking into that as a more deep dive. And that will hopefully allow us to kind of come up with a more sort of fruitful recommendation for next year's commission. So I think that sounds like something very reasonable. Are there any other points that anyone particularly wanted to raise about this? I think I agree as well that I think the recommendations cover very well what we were sort of discussing. And I think, yeah, I'd certainly be quite happy to support these recommendations being going off to kind of cabinet. But anyone else in that case? So in that case, are we all right to sort of formally agree these recommendations? And yeah, fantastic.
Agree.
Excellent. So looking on to the final agenda item, which is the work programme. Obviously, we very briefly sort of discussed that already. But if you have a look at page 39, which I'm yet to find myself, of the agenda item, the agenda pack, that shows the items that were scheduled to be discussed this year but have not yet been discussed at a meeting. And then also a number of items that have actually been planned to be discussed here but were actually taken up at Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This is the last meeting of this municipal year. And given that, would members like to kind of comment or identify items that they think should be prioritised for next year? Obviously, we've already kind of discussed one around TMOs. But does anyone have any sort of particular thoughts on which ones they think should sort of be a priority for the next municipal year? I'm happy to open up to the floor. Councillor Hicks.
Thank you. I would like to revisit repairs, or I would like the Commission to revisit repairs. I think this Commission's previously heard about the repairs improvement plan, and I think it'd be good to come back with progress at and delve into any particular problem areas that are evident through that progress report.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Councillor Lamb.
Why I second that, I also like, some point to bring back heating and hot water outages, because I believe especially rural estates and social estates is quite a big problem. And of course, I know there's a lot of works going on, but I want to know at that time where we are, because that will give the residents some confidence as to what we are doing to resolve the issue, because it's been going on for quite some time.
And I think particularly one of the items that we wanted to bring to this year, but we didn't quite get a chance to, was looking at the district heating sort of networks from the lens of looking at the kind of upcoming market regulations and bringing sort of metering and things like that. So I think that's definitely something that we could, I think, include, and particularly looking at that area, but then also more sort of generally as well, getting a bit of an update from kind of the previous areas that we looked at and what kind of movements have happened with that. So I think that definitely sounds like that would be quite a worthy sort of thing. And I think just to sort of add to the TMOs bit, I've just noticed here that one of the items that we didn't manage to get time for this year was around fair community housing services and looking at a bit of a forensic review at kind of what happened there, what lessons that could be learned from that as well. So I think that would fit in quite well to another kind of item about TMOs and that kind of broader sort of item as well. So those seemed quite good things. But there's Councillor Hargrave.
I would be interested to look at leaseholder charging. It's quite very controversial. Council to accurate billing, detailed billing. I think that would be. I was trying to think of something in the community safety, and something that's coming up a lot in my ward, and I don't know if it's other wards, but something's coming up a lot is antisocial behaviour and rough sleepers. With all sorts of mayhem through that, and it doesn't seem to be an effective way of dealing with it. That might be scrutiny next year.
Thank you, Councillor Hargrave. I think that's a really helpful suggestion. I imagine probably most people in this room would also say that they've had at least some level of kind of that sort of issue in their ward. So it's absolutely definitely a problem. I think there's a really kind of interesting sort of intersection between where the responsibilities are sort of lying between the council, the police, the NHS, and actually having a bit of a dive into how that relationship is working, particularly as we're interviewing Borough Commander as well at some point next year. I think that would be actually, I think, quite a useful exercise. I think that's a really good suggestion. Thank you. Councillor Lamb?
Yeah. Okay, I think I need to move it closer. I think I would like us to look at the issue of homelessness as well, but not in isolation from void property. Whether there's a correlation between that and what we can do because of identifying what are the problems we have, regarding homelessness, and whether having void properties or resolving that can actually help solve some of the homelessness issue we have. Is what looking at it. If we find that actually is more complicated than that, then fair enough. Well, I think having a large proportion of our property void, and then we have a lot of people homeless. Probably that the kind of discussion will allow us to look at what are the effective way addressing homelessness.
I think that's really useful. I think possibly my first year on this commission we did something around empty properties, but I don't think we looked at it from that lens of kind of getting them back. We looked at it more from a sense of getting them back into sort of general needs use, less like as a temporary accommodation point. So perhaps there is something that can be kind of looked at there. I think that's an awful lot of very good ideas, and I'm sure it will give Councillor Foster a lot of things to sort of think about. I think the one thing I wonder is obviously we've kind of now got the community involvement sort of hat on as well as all of that, and I think TMO's part would at least partly kind of cover that, but I didn't know if there was anything sort of like any of the members of the commission thought should be raised, particularly on the kind of resident involvement kind of piece and that community engagement bit as well.
Just an idea.
I wonder if we really need to have our other colleagues here for them to help us make a sensible decision that they'll appreciate as well. I know we should be doing something right now, but I wonder if we can keep something a bit open so that.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I certainly wouldn't want to speak for Councillor Foster, but I think this is very much an agenda item to get a bit of an idea of what the kind of commission's interests are. I think the intention is sort of to obviously speak to the co-opted members of the commission as well, and I think to sort of take these as a bit of a guide, but then not to fix what we're going to be looking at next year, because obviously we may have a different chair of the commission, we might have completely different membership, so I don't think this is going to be anything that's fixed. I think this will just be a bit of a guide as to what the kind of commission thinks would be a useful thing to be looking So I think that's really been really helpful. Sort of before we kind of, is there anything else anyone had that they want to raise?
I did wonder, we're doing a new allocations, aren't we, policy, a new great, and I don't mean immediately, I mean maybe towards the end of the year, that we take a look at how it's going, if it gets brought in, if you see what I mean. I'm assuming everybody's fed into it. But I just wonder later in the year, see what difference it's making, how residents are feeling about it, those especially who are the list to be moved and things, and see if things are, it's an incredibly difficult topic. So it's not, it's just to see if this new system is making a difference, or it's just moving chairs around a bit. I don't know, but it would be good maybe towards the end of the year to see. Just a thought, if there's anything that be reported back at that point. Maybe there won't be.
That's very useful. Thank you, Councillor Salmon. Anyone else? No? In that case, kind of moving on to the final bits about upcoming meetings. This is the final meeting of the year. So I haven't got to tell you what the dates are yet. So they've not been decided, I believe. So yeah, just thank you very much, everyone, for bearing with me. Thank you.